taxonomy.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, you mentioned about the whole innovation curve and everything. One of the questions, you talked a lot about the innovation curve, and one of the things that comes up is the development cycle. And so I was curious, as you see the S curve, whether you expect the release cycles to get shorter or longer, stay the same in general.
Right, so I think generally the release cycles have been getting longer and longer. I think that's sort of been the pattern. And it's one of these things we need to talk about, I think, because I think shorter release cycles would be useful because it provides encouragement to people to effectively make contributions. Because I mean, if you make a contribution now to Drupal 8, you might have to wait 2 years or 3 years before you can actually use it. And so as the cycle gets longer, that's actually going to become more of a problem. I think looking at this graph that I painted, it's gonna make the slow phase directly after the kickoff point. It's gonna make it even slower, and that's why we see people getting really excited as the code freeze nears, because the time to market, if you will, the time between getting your stuff in and being able to use your stuff becomes slower. And so it's an interesting question, and I think we should look at maybe some other projects about how they deal with it. So I don't have the answers, but I'd love to talk about it more. Jacob.
Hi. So I was wondering how do you feel about the community process, decision-making process on Drupal.org? And I know you have a different role in it than the rest of us. And sort of what do you feel like can be done to improve it in terms of consensus decision-making process, technologically, but also culturally. As we grow, it becomes more difficult for a lot of us to be involved.
Right. I think what will naturally happen is more specialization. As Drupal grows, people will sort of start to focus on areas of projects, and naturally, I've learned to. I mean, we very much use a trust model. There's, depending on who reviews a patch or commits a patch, it actually makes my job easier or more difficult. For example, if Chicks or Peter come up with a menu system patch, it's much easier for me to get that accepted because I trust their work, because I know those systems inside out. And so, effectively, they're the maintainers of those things, and it's very easy to get their stuff in. Versus if somebody that I don't know commits a patch, I still have to start building that relationship, building that trust. And so what I think will happen as we grow, I think that trust relationship will become increasingly important. I don't feel like we need to make fundamental changes to the decision-making process. Looking at what we did in Drupal 7, again, it's not always the easiest process, but I feel it's working. That's my take. Question?
Yes, there are a lot of changes, cool things going into core. But what about the upgrade path from?
Can you do it again?
Okay. Yeah, there are a lot of cool things into core, new things, the field API. But what about upgrade from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7? Will be the easy path?
Well, we're going to try and make it as easy as possible, and one of the rules we have is that we will not break your data. There's always going to be an upgrade path for your data. What we will break, and I think that's part of the disruptive innovation, is your APIs. So if you have custom modules, custom code, that will break. If you're a custom code and modules have data manipulation, that might also break. But if you didn't make any changes, there should be a path to upgrade and to get your data from D6 to D7. So, I have time for one more question, or not? One more quick question. Larry?
On the subject of Drupal as framework versus product, one of the things that during the D7 cycle really became apparent to me, at least, is that while that's true, which one you're thinking like when working on a certain task will change your approach. So I think there is a great deal of value in us having that conversation of, okay, where do we want to be thinking framework and where do we want to be thinking product?
Right.
And there will be places where we're going to want to optimize for one case or the other. Those will often be conflict. I think there's also value in looking at ways to separate Drupal itself. I'll give a call out to the small core people and having more of a framework, more separation between Drupal the framework and Drupal the product around it, and do a better job of making it look like that's a blurred line even though it isn't. But this is not as much a question as just a comment for people to think about that the framework versus product question is a much more complicated one than you think once you really get into the code. And I know there are at least 3 sessions this conference on that subject.
Excellent, yeah.
How to approach that problem.
And I fully agree. I mean, it's a very difficult problem in a way, and we haven't figured out the answers. But we will have to, and I think that's not necessarily my task. I think it's a task of everybody here in the community to help come up with the answers. So hope to talk a little bit about that this week and the next couple of years. Alrighty, thank you.